Welcome to this program on reimagine. I think this will pick me up here. Let's not loud. Welcome to this program. It's on reimagining the 21st century prosecutor. It's co-sponsored by the Fair and Just Prosecution and the Stanford Criminal Justice Center. I'm David Sklansky. I teach here, and I'm a former 20th century prosecutor. The news this morning has been dominated by actions taken by federal prosecutors in Washington, D.C. But I think most of you know that the people who are most responsible for the fairness and effectiveness of the American criminal justice system day in and day out are the local prosecutors who work in the thousands of county-level prosecutorial offices across the country. Those prosecutors have vast amounts of power and discretion, and the decisions they make about charging, about plea bargaining, about investigations, about bail, strongly shape the kind of justice that's administered in this country. For years, there's been growing criticism of the way that prosecutors do their jobs. There are complaints that prosecutors overcharge cases, hide exculpatory evidence, coerce guilty pleas, target minority defendants, and condone police violence. Prosecutors are increasingly blamed for wrongful convictions and for mass incarceration, and they're also blamed for trapping indigent, low-level offenders in an oppressive, financially ruinous cycle of fees and fines. In response to those criticisms, a small but growing number of district attorneys have one office across the country are promising to change the way their offices do business. And we're very lucky to have 4 of these new head prosecutors here with us today. To my left is Judge Dinah Becton, who took office as district attorney for Contra Costa County, California, just last month. She was selected by the County Board of Supervisors to complete the term of the elected former district attorney who resigned after pleading guilty to a felony perjury charge related to the misuse of campaign funds for personal purposes. Judge Becton was previously a retired Superior Court judge in Contra Costa County. She's the first woman and the first African American to serve as district attorney in Contra Costa County, and her appointment was widely seen as an endorsement of the need for wide-ranging change in the district attorney's office there. To her left is Mark Gonzalez, who was elected district attorney of Nueces County, Texas last November, beating an incumbent with 29 years of experience as a prosecutor. Gonzalez had spent his entire previous career as a criminal defense attorney. He had won in part by promising greater transparency and a crackdown on prosecutorial misconduct. Tori Verber Salazar, to Mark Gonzalez's left, was elected district attorney of San Joaquin County, California in 2015, the first woman ever elected to that job. She's received nationwide recognition for the reforms she's introduced in her office, including diversification of its staff, new mechanisms of community outreach, and pioneering efforts in partnership with the Stanford Criminal Justice Center to rethink the investigation and prosecution of officer-involved shootings. Finally, to her left is Sherry Boston, who was elected District Attorney of DeKalb County, Georgia in 2016, beating the incumbent office holder. Sherry Boston won office in part by charging that the District Attorney's office there had become ransacked with corruption. So thank all 4 of you for being here. We're also joined today by Miriam Krinsky at the end here, the Executive Director of Fair and Just Prosecution, which is co-sponsoring today's event. Fair and Just Prosecution recently launched a fellowship program for law students interested in gaining experience working in reform-oriented prosecutors' offices. And toward the end of the panel discussion, before we open it up for questions from all of you, I'm going to ask Miriam to say a bit about that program. But I want to start with Mark Gonzalez. During your campaign, you described yourself as a Mexican biker lawyer covered in tattoos. The one across your chest says "not guilty." You used to have, when I first met you, you had a belt buckle that also said "not guilty." You were very successful as a defense attorney. Why in the world did you want to be district attorney?
I didn't say those things about me. People said those things about me. And most of it is all true. I do have a lot of tattoos, and one of them that I do have does say "not guilty" across my chest. Honestly, when you want change, it's either because you're upset or because you have no other option. And that was one of the main reasons why I decided to be, or at least run for district attorney. Trust me, no one thought I would win. Not even I thought I would win, but I said if I sit here silently then I'm not doing anything to help the problem. So that's when I decided to run. So I mean, that is one of the main reasons. I was upset. I wasn't getting evidence when I needed it. My clients were getting charged with crimes that they didn't commit. They were just throwing everything to see what stuck. And I was very successful, not because I'm the greatest lawyer. I'm pretty good, I'll say that much. But at least a trial lawyer. But it was because of the way the prosecutor, the DA's office, was charging these cases. And so it was at a point where I was just upset about it, and I decided to run. And, I never, ever, ever wanted to be a prosecutor. Like, in law school, I went to law school because I got in trouble and I wanted to help my friends out. I mean, that's just the way it really was. When I got out, that's what I tried to do. I didn't ever apply at the DA's office. I probably wouldn't have gotten hired. I've been arrested a few times. And so, I never wanted to do it. And so for me to be the DA is like, I'm still sitting here like I'm in Stanford, and I'm the elected DA covered in tattoos, so it's kind of surreal here. But it is one of the most positive ways that you can actually make change. So if there are individuals, and I'm sure you're going to hear this over and over again, there are individuals here that ever said, I want to help my people, my family, my friends, people that don't have a voice. The prosecutor's office, the DA's office, is the best way to make that guerrilla warfare, that change from within. So start to, hopefully, the way I've changed my thinking about it, I hope that everyone sitting here, 91 people in this place, will start to change the way they feel or the way they think that they can have the impact and make that change.
Judge Becton, is that what drove you to want to be district attorney too?
I think a lot of the same concerns that were just raised would be mine as well. And my background, of course, is very much different because serving as a judge for 22 years, I had an opportunity, and serving, I think, the last 6 or 7 years in a trial department gave me really an opportunity to oversee the entire process from beginning to end of a case. And I think for me, I began to see that the prosecutor's role was one that could strongly shape the decisions that are made in the criminal justice system. Also, in my county, there was a perception from the public standpoint that there was a loss of trust and confidence in the prosecutor's office. And I believe that I was seen as a person who could bring integrity to that office and also begin to shape some policies and decisions that would, again, create the trust that the community has been asking for. So those are the things that primarily drove my decision.
Okay, so Mark Gonzalez has now been in office for a period of months.
10 months.
Have you been able to change anything so far?
Yes, immediately as the DA, you say something, they do it. It's pretty awesome, actually. January 1st, we implemented. It wasn't decriminalization. You have to realize you have broad discretion that the legislator has given you. So one of the main things we did, and this was, I want to say, week 1, we with the stroke of a pen, we possession of marijuana, your case, you enter our divert program, and it's diverted, $250 fine. You can take a class online, and your case is dismissed. Whether it's your first one or your 100th one, it's dismissed. So it doesn't impact you whether it's for financial aid or it's for housing or anything. We just didn't want to be a part of a problem that was going to obviously never ending. I mean, I know some individuals who, smoke, and they're always going to smoke. That's just the way it is. So it was just, it's bad when those habits are stopping people from getting financial aid or housing. So that was one of the first things that we did immediately. We were in the red because obviously as DA, you also have budgets and all this other stuff that's not fun at all. And so you have to pay people's salaries, right? You have to pay their job, and if you mess up, then they're not going to have money, and you look bad. So we were $30,000 in the red immediately starting out because the guy that I beat out, they just stopped doing anything. And so from there to now, we've generated in revenue, and I know people don't like that revenue because then you're making it a business. Don't get me wrong. We don't ever put justice in front of economics, but we've generated over $340,000. And for my county, that's a lot of money off of $250 a pop, So we're using those funds to better treat people or if they need some kind of aid or something like that. So it's kind of just restructuring. That was one of the main things that we've done. But we've done stuff with domestic violence caseload, driving with license invalid. You'd be surprised how many people don't have a driver's license. They get stopped, they go to jail. It's like a cycle, and it's like a cycle. We didn't want to be part of that cycle. So we said, you know what, we're not going to go forward on it. Generate some more revenue, and we can do different things. We're going to do something, though, regarding felony possession of cocaine. If it's a state jail felony, it's like 1 gram. It's going to be similar to our marijuana program, and so hopefully the stigma of a felony, the collateral consequences that you will have last forever. And so we're trying to avoid that. So that's kind of what we've done immediately. Besides, we've been successful. Man, I think we lost 1 case this year. I mean, we're sending guys away that need to go to prison. But the ones that need reform and just need to learn from their lesson, they're also accomplishing that also. So I think we maybe had 1 case that got a not guilty. And I don't say that's because we have good prosecutors. I think they are good. But it's because we're charging people with crimes they commit. We got the evidence to prove it, and that's why we're winning. It's pretty simple. But that's what we've done so far in 10 months.
So Tori, Verber, Salazar, you, unlike Mark Gonzalez, unlike Dinah Becton, you were a career prosecutor in San Joaquin County. So when you took office 2 years ago, you knew the office that you were taking on the leadership of. What did you want to change when you became district attorney, and how much of that have you been able to accomplish?
Well, I think part of what we wanted to do is change from across the board and to get out of that silo that we were the district attorney's office and that we had become, in many senses of the words, people that were just processing cases, that every case had a standard time. If you committed a petty theft, you got between 5 and 30 days and you resolved the case without really looking at why was somebody stealing. Were they homeless? Were they perpetually stealing in order to post on eBay and Amazon and things like that? Why were they stealing? What was the need and what was the necessity? We never kind of had that opportunity by the sheer volume of cases, and partly because of the way we were trained is just to process these cases and move them through the system as fast as we could because of the sheer volume. And then we thought, well, let's look at the whole picture. What are we all doing? What is everybody doing? And so we reached out and we partnered with law enforcement and we said, what are we doing at this time of arrest? Does everybody need to be arrested? Does everybody need to be cited and booked? Can we do what we call a law enforcement arrest deferral program and defer them out of the system so that they don't even come in? Can we do plea and abeyances where we suspend the sentence in order to motivate them to complete some of their programming, whether it be substance abuse disease or whether issues with behavioral health or homelessness or poverty, those kinds of things that we can work collaboratively with them to get them back up and functioning. And then we looked at the role that we played as prosecutors and how we could slow down, take an opportunity to look at these cases and really achieve that goal. What is that goal? Public safety. It's not processing cases. It's not winning every case. It's not winning or losing. And it's not tough on crime or light on crime. It's smart on crime. Because you can't keep doing what we were doing because data has showed us it was not successful. And the people have voted in, propositions that are telling us they didn't like the way we were doing business. So we had to be responsive and listen to that. And then we reached out to our partners on the other side, on the defense side, and said, let's look collaboratively what we can do to improve there. And now to the bench, we're looking for leadership on fines, fees, and bail. And the next phase that we're working on right now is the jail and prison, because there are, like Mark was saying, there are people that need to be removed from society because they pose such a grave harm. They're molesting children, they're raping women, they're murdering on the street. So we have to remove them from society. But when we do so, we have to be able to guarantee the public while they're in that situation, or whether it be from temporary housing to CDCR, that they are getting the services that they need so that when they do come back, because 90% of everybody that's incarcerated is coming back, that they come back better people. Because they've already taken something from us. They've already harmed somebody in the community. I can't have them coming back. So it was widespread across the board. And what that allowed us to do is to start thinking, well, what is it like to be in law enforcement shoes? What's it like to be arrested? What's it like to be a defendant? What's it like to be a witness, a victim? What is it like to be incarcerated? And what are the programs? So that we can start, we call it standing in their shoes. Stand in their shoes for a minute and see what it's like. to be in that person's, in their journey and their process. So we're looking at it across the board, total systematic change from beginning to end. And it's a big project, because each time you open the door, you think, oh, there's 5 more things we need to tackle. But for us, the biggest things we've changed is slow down, take a look at the case, find a solution that serves our underlining and our overarching goal is public safety. How do we do that? We can no longer just say, I got the time, therefore I did my job, because that person's coming back out. And if the person isn't in better shape, they're going to reharm your community. And so you want to make sure that we're doing that. And that allows us to work with partners like behavioral health, our homelessness task force, our poverty prevention. We do a big stay in school program, because 40% of our kids at one point were truant. So we're working on that. We're looking at it as a whole approach for the entire community. Because if we just stay in our little silo, it doesn't work. We have to be able to work with each agency. So that's where we're going.
Sherry Boston, I'd like to bring you into this conversation. You're a judge, and you've held now 2 different elected prosecutorial positions in DeKalb County. First as Solicitor General, overseeing misdemeanor prosecutions, and now as District Attorney overseeing felony prosecutions. I wondered if you could say something about the different kinds of reform challenges that you face in both of those jobs.
Absolutely. So in Georgia, we are a little bit different. You can laugh. That's okay. We are different. And in the way that our system works in Georgia is that in many of our more metropolis areas, we have 2 elected prosecutors. So we have the district attorney, whose function is to generally oversee the prosecution of felony cases. And then in Georgia, we have solicitor generals who are also elected and oversee the prosecution of misdemeanor cases. So I had the pleasure of serving as the elected solicitor general for 6 years before I decided to run and became the next district attorney. And so it allows, when you have an office that either focuses all on misdemeanors or all on felonies, it gives you the opportunity to really hone in and have a lot of perspective on specific things. And so for misdemeanor cases, in my office, we used to have a slogan that misdemeanors mattered. And it was the ability to make change on really small levels. Because as the solicitor running that office, I saw it as my absolute purpose to stop people from graduating into felony criminal life. So we actually had a role in the system where we felt like if we implement the right types of diversion programs, accountability programs, and interventions, that we could actually prevent somebody from graduating to another level of crime where there perhaps were mandatory minimums. So we really had the ability to just focus when you don't have to deal with murders and rapes and armed robberies and these serious offenses. You have the ability to sort of break it down and really just focus on what crimes are not only driving quality of life problems in your community, but also give you the ability to see that all the people that are coming through your office, these are not criminals, these are not bad people. These are people, for the most part, that either have had unfortunate circumstances, have bad situations, whether it's alcohol or drug abuse. And it gave us the ability to do a lot of intervention, a lot of reform, and just focus. One of the major reforms that I was able to work on during my time as solicitor really was around this issue of how we really imprison those who can't afford to pay fines and fees in our country. And so we had a longstanding traffic court that had been around for many years. It predated the revision of our Georgia Constitution, so it was kind of a special court on its own. But it had systematically been a court that I thought had been depriving the liberty of due process to the everyday people that came through that court. And I had the experience of being a judge in that court, so I had seen it firsthand. And there were a lot of things that I wanted to do. And when I became solicitor, it gave me the ability to, as I like to say, throw a grenade and blow it up, which is what we did. And I went down to the legislature. I got the court essentially disabled and I helped work with legislation to rewrite it, put in elected judges, make sure there were prosecutors in the courtroom, public defenders in the courtroom, instituted processes that made sure that people understood their rights, and also instituted processes that made sure that people did not spend, for example, 10 to 15 days in jail on a speeding ticket, which was pretty common and routine in that jurisdiction. So that was one of the things that I was very excited to have the opportunity to work on, and really fueled me to make the decision to give that up and run for district attorney, which a lot of people thought I was crazy for doing, because I was safely in a seat where no one, by all accounts, was going to run against me. And I decided, well, I want to effectuate change, and so I'm going to do the impossible, which is challenge the incumbent district attorney in my county, who I felt didn't have the best interest of the citizens at heart. And I felt like there was more work I wanted to do, more reform I wanted to do, more victims I wanted to help. And so I made the decision to give up my seat and run for district attorney. And luckily, 63% of the county agreed with that decision. And so then I won that election. And since I've been in office, we have been focusing on what are the things that we can do now on a much larger level around holding offenders accountable, while at the same time creating avenues and opportunities to effectuate change in nonviolent offenders, and also to find space for programs that help those that are coming back and returning in to our communities.
The district attorney's job is so complicated. You have so many different things that you need to pay attention to. And a lot of what you do is stuff that the public never sees. I'm wondering if all four of you, if you decide you want to continue in your job, are eventually going to have to run for re-election. And I'm wondering what you'll want voters to focus on. Like how if you can think forward to when you're running for re-election, how would you want to be judged? How would you want voters to decide whether or not you've been successful as a reform prosecutor? Question for any of you.
Wow. So I guess starting for me, having been voted into office just in 16, like overwhelmingly, that was a lot of pressure. Because it's one thing if you win by 1 percentage point, you can say to yourself, well, it could have gone either way. But when you win with an overwhelming majority, especially against an incumbent, there's a great deal of pressure because you've gone out on the stump, you've said, this is what I'm going to do, and then you get into office and there's the expectation that you can accomplish that on day one, when it's not. It's a long process. And some of those things I've been able to immediately get done, and other things are taking much longer than I would like. So jumping ahead to 2020, when I'm back on the ballot, I hope that the people in my county feel like I have served them well, in the sense that I have been as fair as possible, that we've been transparent, that we've held our serious violent offenders accountable and tried to reduce crime in our area. I mean, we're all experiencing this. I'm sure our murder rates are going up all over the nation. They certainly are in my jurisdiction this year. So that's a focus for me, is protecting my community. But at the same time, I hope that I will have been able to implement programs that show that we are trying to rehabilitate those in our community that we feel like we absolutely can. So I hope that's how I'm judged in 2020, and hopefully that is alone on the ballot by myself. Only name.
So back to if you decide you want to keep this up, you're going to be up for re-election next year, right?
Now. Yeah, so I don't really have an opportunity to do a lot of thinking about that. But yes, my election cycle, I will be up for election. The actual election will be in June of 2018. So I'm running.
So in June of 2018, how do you want voters to be thinking about whether you were successful?
Sure. So I think for me, one of the things that happened in terms of the nomination process for the position was that we had a lot of opportunities to hear from the public, to hear what people felt they wanted to see in the district attorney's office. And having that kind of feedback and continuing to listen both inside of the office and outside of the office in the 4 weeks that I've been here has been very helpful. One of the things that people were very clear about, in addition, of course, to us keeping the community safe, people were very clear that they wanted someone to restore the public trust and confidence in the district attorney's office. And so that's certainly something that I'll have my eye on going forward, and making sure that I'm instituting policies and practices and being transparent so that the community will think that we have been responsive to their needs. Some of the work that I did as a judge, I think we can carry over and use it in the district attorney's office to continue to build that trust. As a judge, I worked very collaboratively with communities in order to do things that I think help to restore some of the balance in our criminal justice system. For example, partnering with not only all of our criminal justice partners, but also with the faith community to bring what we call clean slate to the community. And so that was a very powerful statement for our community to see that you had a person who was serving as a judge, but also wanted to see people have successful outcomes, like being able to get their license back, getting rid of a lot of fines and fees that shackle them, and getting rid of convictions that also shackled them and prevented them from getting jobs. And so I think that kind of work already sort of gave me a head start with that process of being considered a person who could bring the trust and confidence to and be responsive to the community, but also now to bring that work inside into the district attorney's office, I think will go a long way. The other thing that people indicated that they wanted to see was they wanted to see that our office was treating everyone fairly in the community. And so I think that's going to be another place where I would like to be judged as having done a good job. So, and finally, bringing about change within the office, because people feel, because of the fact that over the last 10, 12 years, we've had so much negative publicity in the office, people want to feel that the person coming in now has been instrumental in sort of shaking things up and bringing about change within the office.
Mark Gonzalez, let me ask you a slightly different question. How will you know whether you've been successful?
That's a great question. If I get reelected, hopefully. But honestly, I didn't, for my own, I typically don't care what people think or say. I mean, that's just the way I am, As long as I'm true to myself, and I know that we went in there day in and day out, we try to do the right thing. We try to make sure, on my office pins it says "Do the right thing." We got Spike Lee a poster in the quad, so that way everybody knows, hey, at the end of the day, you need to do the right thing. And so, as long as I'm true to myself and I'm true to my family and my people, I think that no matter what people say about me, I'm fine with it. I didn't win by 63%. I won by 1,200 votes. I went to sleep that night thinking I had lost. My brother wakes me up like at 2 a.m. saying, "You won, you won." He was wasted. I was asleep. I was like, dude, because there's nothing you can do at that point in time. And so for me, I have this platform guaranteed for 3 more years. That's it. And so that's why I'm so blessed to be part of these organizations where I get to talk to people who can influence and shape things out. And so if someone says, if they remember me by saying I was wrong about that guy, I'll be happy with that. Because the same questions for me. I want people to say I was transparent, I was efficient. Because a lot of times, a lot of my conservative counterparts, this is South Texas, there's 252 DAs in Texas, okay? None of them look like me, just so you know. But I want them to say that either way he was physically responsible. Like, I don't like that he probably dismissed or diverted marijuanas, but you know what? It's saving us money from keeping these people, nonviolent offenders from being in jail for 2 weeks, and that's smart. So if they can say we bring everyone together because of economics or because maybe other people feel that it was the appropriate thing, then I'm good with that. So I hope to get reelected, and I hope that I do such a good job. You don't want to have an opponent, but I'm sure, I mean, I got a target on my back every day. So I'm sure there'll be one or two already ready to come after me. But like I said, as long as we do the right thing, I think I'm good with that.
And Tori, Verber, Salazar, how do you want people in San Joaquin County to assess whether you've been a good district?
That's a good question. I hope that what we've done and that we hope to achieve, and like you said, you're guaranteed 4 years unless you get, impeached or something along the way here. But I would hope people would think that I challenge them to think a little bit differently. Because so often, as a society, we were taught that if there's a harm, then we do a harm, in a sense, that we seek this prosecution that was driven really for a punitive purpose, for punishment purposes. And so in some cases, that is what is driven by it. But in most cases, you have to look at what are we doing here, and not just to go to our automatic go-to reflex. And that's hard to create that kind of change, because as a society, we've been taught that. Something goes wrong, then that person needs it. They need that kind of punishment. But what is punishment? And how do you define that? And how do you define the success of it? And one thing in the criminal justice system is, for the most part, we're not very data-driven, because we've always somewhat hidden behind the excuse that, well, how do you define success? Well, you can define it, and you can also find out whether or not you're being fair and equitable, if you have racial disparity issues, if you are not implementing the law in a fair and just way. All of those things can be looked at, evaluated, and better determinations can be made. And then if you're not going to do it for the right thing, because like Mark said, you should always every day get up and say, I'm going to do it right and do it well. But also look at it for the financial aspect of it. And I'll give you an example. We did a case not long ago where Caltrans comes in and moves the homeless camps from out under the freeway. I'm not really sure why. I don't know why, but they're under the freeway must be clear at all times. There's some need for that. So they move out the homeless, and they've cited them all. And the office filed 20 trespassing charges, okay? So when you're filed with cases charged against you, we have to send you notice to come to a court. We have to give you proper notice. And, of course, you're homeless, so we're not going to be able to mail that to you, and most likely not going to be able to email or cell phone that to you, that message to you. And so all 20, which shouldn't have been filed to begin with, but now were filed, and had to be bench warrants were issued. For what? How is that justice? And you know what that costs? $20,000. $20,000 for what? And now with a bench warrant, by law, technically I have to be looking for you. If I'm not looking for you, I have to dismiss that case. And if you came back a year from now and you had that on your were picked up on the warrant, and you had moved on in your life, we were going to dismiss it. So what was the purpose of doing those cases? And I think that's where we have to start challenging ourselves, to saying, why are we taking these cases on when there's better resolutions for them? $20,000 could have housed those 20 people for the winter months that are coming up in the cold. They could have been used for mental health and addiction services and transitional housing and other things like that. As a society, wouldn't we want that for all of us? I represent all 750,000 people in the county, not just this group or that group or this group, all of them. And I would want them to be better people. So I'm hoping that in the end, people change in the end when people look back at what I've accomplished, that I challenge them to think a little bit differently. And I challenge them to think with a little bit more kindness and compassion. And if that kindness and compassion doesn't drive you, then the fiscal aspect of it should drive you, because it doesn't make sense to continue to do work in that manner. It's not justice. It's not fair. And on that day, we didn't serve the public. We didn't protect people's rights. We didn't guard the Constitution. We didn't do what we needed to do. And so at that point, we have to say, let's sit down and think. Let's not judge. Let's not be mean-spirited or name-calling. But let's sit down and think, couldn't we have done a lot of things along the way a lot better? And so that's what I hope that people remember us by.
So Mark Gonzalez said early in our conversation that when you're a district attorney, you get to say things and that people do them. But you all lead large organizations, and there's been lots of discussion over the last several years about culture in prosecutors' offices. Lots of prosecutors' offices have been faulted for having a kind of win-at-all-costs mentality that everybody's guilty all the time. Prosecutors' offices have been faulted for tolerating racist, sexist language. And I'm wondering, have you dealt with problems like this in your offices? And if so, how can you address that kind of a thing?
Me or him? And those are great questions. When you look at culture, you have to stop and ask yourself, what was going on? What was going on in the office across the United States? It's not just in California, it's across the United States these issues arise. And so when you look back at the history of the district attorney's office throughout, you really have to take a good look at the role that we played in the criminal justice system and the justice for everybody in America. And so when we looked at that, and about a year ago, we started a listening tour where we went out and we met with groups. And we specifically talked to them about, how do you see the prosecutor? What do I look like to you? How can I be better? What can I do to be more transparent? And they talked about that. They talked about a closed and not being transparent. They talked about racial disparity. They talked about sexism. They talked about most prosecutors back in the day were white men. You know, nothing against white men. I don't mean to offend anybody, but that's what the office looked like. Okay, and there wasn't diversity. There wasn't gender diversity and faith diversity and all kinds of diversity in the office. So there was no ability to connect with that office. And then if you go further and you look back into the history of prosecutors and you look at some of the worst events in our history where individuals were literally hung for committing a crime of talking to a white woman or pushing into a white woman. And the term they used, and it's a highly offensive term, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but sometimes you need to use these terms because you should be sick to your stomach by these words, and that's lynching. And when you look at those photographs, who are you going to see there? You're going to see the cop, a judge, a DA, and a defense attorney. The entire criminal justice system failed you. Absolutely failed. There's no way you can describe it any other way than failed. And you look at that, and so you look from the perspective of an African-American community and what they perceive. That's what's been passed down from generation to generation. And you reach out to the Hispanic community. Almost 50% of my community is Hispanic. Where were we when Cesar Chavez came to only ask for a livable wage? We were there with officers and dogs and guns and batons and DAs and judges and defense attorneys. And the same if you go to the Southeast Asian community and you go to the white community, whatever community you go to, there has been a time when we have not been everything we should have been. There was a time when we were not as great as we should have been. We were not the guardians of justice that we should have been. And we have to accept responsibility, and we have to apologize. And I apologize to all of you, and I have been going out throughout the county and apologizing, because we have to accept the responsibility for the role that we played and for the distrust that has grown. Because until we do acknowledge the past harm and accept responsibility and apologize, genuinely understand, not just get up and say, I'm sorry, but understand what it means to stand in somebody else's shoes, what it means to perceive criminal justice, we're not going to be able to create substantive change. And so we've been doing that in our community, working with our community to accept responsibility, and so have our partners at Stockton Police Department in law enforcement. They have been going out and doing the same presentation and seeking to rebuild this trust and to get us to move forward. So that's kind of where we're at in order to start from anew. With that, it's brought a breath of fresh air, because now we're looking at ourselves and saying, okay, what are we saying and doing? What are we doing? What are we saying in the hallways? What are we saying in the courtroom? What are we saying in the office? Is it sexist? Is it discriminatory? Is it degrading? We hear people making jokes about those who are struggling with mental health. That is no joke. We should never diminish that. We hear jokes and comments and remarks like that. We immediately have zero tolerance for that. And so we've implemented a county-wide, or office-wide policy, I should say, zero tolerance for that kind of conduct, because it diminishes. Anytime we diminish anybody, we diminish all of us. So we're working to change that culture. But when you talk about it, it's easy to judge and to say, I don't want to be a part of that because look at that. But if you want to create that change, then you got to come in the door. You got to be a part of our team. We're on the ground. We're on the ground. And if you want to create that change and build that foundation and really give the prosecution, the court, the defense, the law enforcement, that ability to be fair and transparent, then you got to roll up your sleeves and come work with us, because that's how it's going to begin.
You know, when I first started as a defense attorney, we used to go to court with the prosecutors, and we would battle it out, and then afterwards we would go ahead and go to happy hour because it wasn't personal. And as years later, it started to be where I started to notice, like, they took it personal. Prosecutors took it personal, and they wanted to win at all costs. Like, they would get upset if you would win. And it had nothing to do with that person. It was a win mentality. And so when I took office, we wanted to change that. If you hide evidence, that will not be tolerated. If you feel a certain way about somebody, that will not be tolerated. So we got rid of some people, and we had to, because that's just the way it has to be. And I tell some of my young prosecutors, I would rather, honestly, have a young prosecutor fresh out of law school, and that way we can show them our vision for my office, instead of having someone who's been a prosecutor for 30 years and this is how they've done it. And, they have those feelings towards the minority groups. And I don't know why, but they do. And maybe it's because that's all they've ever known, because they were getting taught from prosecutors who felt that way. So it's hard, if that's what's all you've learned, then it's kind of hard to hold them accountable, even though we're doing it. But now it's our job to show them that, hey, it's not acceptable. And so I tell some of these young prosecutors every time that we talk to them, I said, how is this making our community better? That's the question you always ask yourself. Is it the right thing to do? And just because we can, should we? Because sometimes we'll have a video, right, of a guy hitting his wife or a guy who stole something. So what? Just because we can get them a conviction doesn't mean we should do it. Is it going to ruin that person's life? How can we help this person? So those are the different types of questions that I want to ask or bring to these new prosecutors. So that's what we've kind of been doing from the get-go. And not only that, we're making it as not personal anymore. Look, we can go to court. We could duke it out. You could whoop me. I could whoop you. Afterwards, this is our job, And so we've made initiatives with the defense bar. We go to happy hour. We're even having a Christmas. I mean, those things, small things like that help. You don't think about it, but it really does, because you have to work with some of these people every single day, and sometimes they take it personal. So you have to remove yourself and take it out of there. And not only that, we've tried to diversify our prosecutors. When I took office, my associate, he's a African-American dude. He's a young guy. He became my first assistant at 30 years old. And he told me, he's like, Mark, so you're crazy. He's all, dude, you cannot hire me as your first assistant. I said, why not? He said, bro, I'm black. He's all, I'm 30, and you want me to be your first? I'm like, yeah, why not? I said, that's what this office needs, somebody different, somebody out the box. So we've had people now, he's obviously a person of color holding one of the highest positions in my office. We have women who are supervisors now that never were, people of different sexual orientations, races, religion, whatever, we welcome everyone. Just how a law school class is better because of different points of view. I think our office should be that way also. You don't want 20 people that all grew up in the same place, that have the all life experience. They're never going to know what those people are going through, or somebody accused of a crime. So that's why we want to bring diversity. We got some defense attorneys now who work in my office. One of my a guy who showed me how to try cases. He's one of my prosecutors now who does the violent caseload. So that's the way we're trying to change it. And luckily, our office, we only have 45 lawyers that work under me, so it's not too big like some of these other areas that have 75. What Kim has, like 400 lawyers, so we can actually influence these individuals and guide them to hopefully get these good changes that you really want. So that's what we're doing.
Sure. Sherry Boston, have you had any difficulty getting the prosecutors you supervise in either of the offices that you run in DeKalb County to come on board with your vision for what prosecutors should be doing?
Yes. Yes. And, what I was reminded of when I took office is, I spent a great deal of time campaigning, and I had my vision, I had my message, because I was going out every single day and talking to the people. And if you ask the people in the community, they knew what my message was. What I learned pretty quickly after taking office is that all the people that now worked for me had no idea what my message was, right? And so I had to figure out a way to now not just it's not enough for them to know where to follow. Like, they have to have buy-in in order to effectuate real change, because I'm not in the courtroom, and I can't be on every single one of our cases. But what I was finding as things were coming to me, I would see a case and it would be brought to my attention and I'd hear about what was happening and I'd be like, well, I don't like that. That's not a part of my mission and vision. And I realized very quickly that I'm like, but have I found the right way to trickle that message down all the way to my line attorneys? And what I found when I first came in, and still to this day, is no, I have not been very successful in that. So we've had to reimagine. And when I say we, me and my deputy chiefs have had to say, how do we go about making these changes that we came in to do all the way down? How do we let that trickle down? And it's very, very difficult because there are people that have worked in the office for a long time and have a mindset. They've worked for other electeds. There are even new lawyers. They're coming in with different thoughts and ideas that aren't exactly yours, or people coming in with different experiences. For me, I run an office where the vast majority of our defendants are Black and brown people. And they are Black and brown people that have lived in, a lot of times, poverty and low education. 90% of the people serving time right now in our local jail are without a GED or a high school equivalency. Most of my lawyers can't understand the life that those people have had to lead, or the circumstances to which they've had seen themselves in. In their minds, they're like, well, this is easy. You can just go out and get a job. It's not that hard, right? But if you've never had that experience. So we are slowly but surely coming up with ways to try to push down that balance. What does it mean to be progressive? And what does it mean to work for an elected who wants to have a progressive office? So, for example, we just partnered with the U.S. Attorney's Office in my district, in the Northern District of Georgia, who had produced a film called Released. When Does the Sentence End? And I very forcefully, but not forcefully, suggested to all the folks in my office from top to bottom that they should come out to the screening that I was hosting with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and we were going to have a couple of the returning citizens there, and we were going to do like a panel discussion. And I was happy to look out and see a lot of folks from my office that came to watch that screening, because what I wanted them to understand is when you're standing in court and you sentence somebody and you think, oh, it's no big deal that I'm putting someone on probation for 15 years, that it is actually a really big deal. And so for them to see a documentary and meet people that talk about the consequences of nonviolent convictions, sometimes violent convictions, and the hurdles that they face when they are released and have paid that debt to society is really important. And for them to hear me engaged in that dialogue as an elected prosecutor saying this is an important issue that we're working to reform, I hope is just pushing that down little by little. And we'll continue to do things like that in my office so that I can continue to have folks thinking about the actions and consequences and the power that they have every day in the criminal justice system.
Becton, are there cultural problems in the district attorney's office in Contra, Costa County? And if so, what can you do about it?
Just a few. Now, you mentioned a lot of problems when you initiated this question, and I think that for my office, we've unfortunately had a number of those problems. Problems relating to sexism, problems relating to even allegations of rape within the office. You've already mentioned that our most recent district attorney resigned after pleading to charges of perjury. And so it's essentially what I would call good people behaving badly that has become the perception of our office. And so that's one set of problems in terms of The solutions for those kinds of problems, what I've been trying to do in the few weeks that I've been there is to make sure that people know that we're going to have a different culture, and that is a culture of accountability in the office. So if there are things that you are doing that are not appropriate or right, then you will understand that there will be repercussions for that in this office, because we will hold ourselves to a high ethical standard. There's another culture in our office that has developed over the years, and that is a culture that relates to focusing on getting trials out and getting convictions, as opposed to a culture that asks the question of what is the right thing to do. And the reason that culture has been able to live is because for the younger attorneys coming into the office, the promotions were very much tied to the number of trials that a person undertook, as opposed to being tied to other principles like doing the right thing, exercising discretion in the proper way, even if it meant dismissing the case, etc. So we're working to change that culture as well, removing the quotas and coming up with other ways to evaluate our younger attorneys as they move through this system. And then the third thing that I would mention would have to do with the lack of diversity in our office, and making sure that I'm now at this early stage inserting myself into the process that we use to attract new attorneys to our office, and making sure that we are reaching out to get people from a variety of backgrounds and creating a more diverse culture in our office. And one other thing I wanted to mention as well, because I think it was sort of mentioned, and that is making sure that I have buy-in from the people in the office going forward as we effectuate all of these changes. So one of the things, I've always been a person who's seen a lot of value in the strategic planning process, and I like it because it is a very inclusive process. So in my first 2 weeks of office, I had the entire staff, all 200, the attorneys, the lawyers, the staff, everyone, in a strategic planning session, and then we broke down into smaller units so that I could hear from everyone in the office. What are the things that you think we're doing really well? What are we doing very badly? What kinds of things would you like to see us do in the future? What are the opportunities that are coming? Like it could be new legislation, it could be reform, and how can we incorporate all of those ideas into formulating a plan, first for your unit and then for our office, and creating a new vision for our office. And so the thing that was so empowering about that is that every single person in that office had an opportunity to lend a voice to what change should look like, and now those ideas will be incorporated as we go forward.
So on that note, I want to turn to Miriam Krinsky. I'm wondering if you could say a bit about fair and just prosecution and about the fellowship program that you launched.
Great. Thanks, David. And let me actually, before getting to that, how many of you think you might want to be prosecutors? Hopefully these folks raise their hands as well. And how many of you think you might want to be defense attorneys? Great. Civil rights lawyers? Nice. Maritime? Anybody? Tax law? No. Okay. Good. So I want to speak maybe most to those of you, not that those who want to be prosecutors are irrelevant, but those who want to be civil rights lawyers or defense lawyers. The work we're trying to do at Fair and Just Prosecution, and thank you to Stanford and David and Debbie for setting the table for this conversation, is to try to find those of you who are passionate about reforming the criminal justice system and bring you these sort of voices to realize that you can do a lot of good in a prosecutor's office. Prosecutors are the linchpin in many ways to changing our justice system. They're going to control the front door, who comes into the justice system, if they come in at all, if they are tried as adults versus being able to kind of have their juvenile mistakes be treated as adolescent misbehavior, if they're going to face a mandatory minimum. 95% of cases are disposed of by plea negotiations. So prosecutors are the ones who are going to decide what sort of treatment and life-changing decisions people face. And prosecutors, despite the best effort of David and others, often are below the radar. 95% of them, incumbent DAs, are going to win re-election. 85% of them are never even going to have a challenger. And I know some folks are trying valiantly to change that and to elevate the understanding of who are our prosecutors. But I think that underscores the extent to which, if we want to change the justice system, we need to find people like this to be able to run for office, to help support them when they're in office, and to work with them from the top down and the bottom up to make them better and more impactful what they do. So we find these leaders and work with them at Fair and Just Prosecution. We believe this is a new day. We believe that, when Mark Gonzalez says, most of them don't look like me, when Sherry says, I want to throw the grenades and blow up some of the boxes, when Dinah says, I'm going to shake it up, we believe that that's how we're going to change the justice system. So most of the prosecutors that we're working with are new in office, have broken through a glass ceiling, and beat an incumbent with a new vision of the justice system. We're working to try to amplify them, to bring them together and help them to learn, and to network them together so that they have a safe space and a table where they all look and think like this and are willing to sort of compare notes and be that much better. We also believe that the momentum for justice system change is all local right now. Smart justice and the sorts of changes we were seeing happening at a federal level are not going to continue over the next few years. And so if we want to bring about some changes, not only do local prosecutors have the keys to that kingdom, but we're not going to see the same sort of fires lit under the justice system for change that we had seen previously. So Fair and Just Prosecution in our Fellows Program is trying to look for a few good select law students who want to spend a summer with one of these folks, and you have information about the program. We are looking to create, to the extent possible, a diversity pipeline through that. We're looking to try to find law students who want to not simply work with leaders like this, but also work on a policy project. So we network our fellows together. We send them on the road. We try to, we try to network our fellows together with each other, so we're going to create a network of our fellows. We look to continue them into their following 2L or 3L year on a policy project, ideally. And we're going to try to create some opportunities for our fellows, whatever office they're in, to hear from other prosecutors in other offices, and even perhaps to bring them together, the fellows, as a group. So we're looking to try to find individuals that want to do that work. And let me just say two final things, which is one, Fair and Just Prosecution couldn't be doing the work we're doing without visionary support. And so, I see one of our wonderful funders here from Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. We need support to do the work that we're doing with these folks, and I want to thank you, Sasha, and others there for giving us the support that you have. And the other thing I want to say is that, I think we all embrace that notion of insanity, that we just can't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We know what hasn't worked. And we know that trying to punish and incarcerate our way out of mental illness and drug addiction and poverty and a host of other issues has not worked. And so we've got to be doing things differently. And I also would encourage us all to be a little bit impatient about it. Every single day, lives are being impacted. So if we're not going to work with and support folks like this, we are agreeing to allow the status quo to remain in place. So talk to us, feel inspired, I hope. And finally, two of my wonderful team, John Butler, an alumni from Stanford, who's come home to inspire you with the good work we're doing, and Hillary Blout, who is a phenomenal individual here in California, who is a real force of nature, who worked for some of the best prosecutors, Kamala Harris, George Gascon, and now we're privileged to have her as part of our team. Talk to us about the work we're doing, talk to them about the work they're doing, and thank you to Stanford for giving us a chance for this conversation.
We have about 10 minutes left, and you all have been very patient listening, so I want to give you guys a chance to ask questions. Yes.
Hi, I'm Pat. I'm a second-year law student here. I just want to thank you guys all for coming. So at this moment in time, I think there's, relatively speaking, broad societal consensus that reform is necessary and desirable. But many of the laws that are the most punitive and severe, results of which we're dealing with today were born out of a context of fear and frenzy tied to what once were very high crime rates. And so I'm curious, because as you mentioned, crime rates are going up across the nation, how you maintain or how you plan to maintain efforts that you believe are the right thing to do if and when public opinion sways against you.
That's a really good question. So I will say this, that, although I'm a woman of color running an office in Atlanta, that is not reflective of what life is like in Georgia. We have, and in Georgia, our district attorneys are partisan elected. So, and I live in a Republican state. But having said that, we're pretty lucky in Georgia to have a governor who actually is leading sort of the charge on criminal justice reform, Governor Nathan Deal, who is a Republican. And in my state, there just seems to be this notion that we do have to reform the system for different reasons. Most of my Republican friends are driven by the finances of it. Most of my Democratic friends are driven by the justice of it. And the way that I see it is, it doesn't matter what our reasons, we all agree that reform has to happen. So how do we continue that when we do have issues? I spend a great deal of my time, January through March, at the legislature, because that's where change has to be affected. We have discretion on a lot of things that we can do, but then there's a lot that we don't. In my state, if you commit an armed robbery, it's a mandatory minimum of 10 years in jail, no parole, no early release. I can't change that. So we spend a lot of time making sure that the laws will continue to allow for there to be these accountability and diversion programs, give us the ability to effectuate change, while also making sure that we are not implementing more and more mandatory minimum sentences that take away discretion from judges to have the ability to take into account the individual circumstances on a case. So, it really, I tell people all the time that equally important to who your prosecutor is are your local legislators who are writing the laws for the state you live in, because they're creating that landscape.
Anybody else want to talk about insulating reform against resurgent pressures to be tough on crime?
Well, I think that when you're looking at an increase in crime, and you've had a slight increase this year, you have to break down that data as well. So when you look at the uptick or increase in homicides, for example, across the United States, a large portion of it's being driven by one location. Over 55% of it's being driven by one location. So then you have to say, what can we do to help that location? What resources can we bring? Because with tough on crime, and if you use that terminology and you look at the 80s and the 90s when sentences were very high and numbers were very large, your crime, you still had crime. It doesn't necessarily deter. And if you look at the CDCR statistics, anywhere from 50 to 70% will reoffend within the first 12 to 36 months. Okay, so prison isn't really a deterrent to over half the population that's going in. So you have to start asking those kind of tough questions and looking at what is driving crime, not only what we're doing, probably or has been proven not to be the right approach in the tail end of it, but what are we doing ahead of time? So are we making sure our kids are in school? Are we making sure they're getting a solid, good education? Are we advocating for them to get advanced, to advance in that employment opportunities, wellness in that community, neighborhood resolution-driven solutions, so that things that are starting to escalate in the neighborhood can be resolved in the neighborhood, so that we can get resources quickly to individuals to deter them. Because what we want, and I think I don't like to speak for others, but I think I can in this scenario, we don't want your business. We'd like to be out of business, to be honest with you, because it would be a safer and healthier environment. So we don't want you the first time. We sure as heck don't want you the second, third, or fourth time, So what we have to do is start really looking at the whole picture. What are we doing from the beginning, throughout the process, through the juvenile years, through the adult years? How are we doing that to deter crime from occurring? And you're right, doing this takes a risk. Some people will be pissed off at all of us. and think that maybe we've sold out or label us or call us names or things like that. And that's, that's fine, because if you're an elected official, you got to be able to take the heat. You take death threats, you take everything that comes your way, you have to handle. But what you have to do is have those first and open and honest conversations about substantive change. Because we could keep doing what we're going to do and then hope that crime goes down or goes up. And if you look at the cycle of crime, you look every 3 or 4 years, you're going to get a peak up, and then it'll start to come down a little bit, and then it'll peak up a little bit. So you have to look at the whole picture and not be, like kind of what we talked about earlier, not be just immediately go to that. We need to be meaner. We need to be tougher. We need to be, and I'm not saying there's not times when you're not going to be that. You have to be balanced, and you have to think of it from a way as to really create safety, public safety in your community. And how do you do that? How do you achieve that? And it can't just be looking at it from my perspective as a prosecutor. I have to look at the role that mental health and homelessness and addiction plays in the community. And how does that spur our misdemeanor deferral programs? It doesn't help me if I have a domestic violence homicide because we failed. It's too late. But what can help me is in misdemeanors being aggressive in the sense that I'm going to get wraparound services to that defendant. I'm also going to get wraparound services to that family because they watched maybe their mother or their father be beaten by another individual in the house. So I've got to stabilize that situation as well. Now, it'd be easy for me just to say 30 days and go to anger management for 52 weeks. That doesn't really heal the problem. I still have 3 children that witnessed their mother be beaten in the home. If I don't take precaution and steps to help them, statistically, they're going to grow up to become another victim, or they're going to become the perpetrator later on in life. So how do I change it from there? And that's how you start really addressing this crime. It's not going to happen overnight, and tomorrow we're not going to have 0 homicides and 0 burglaries and robberies. But if we start approaching it from the beginning to the end, in a sense, then we're going to see some substantive change that's going to sustain. It's critical too. It has to sustain. And really, from the 90s, our crime rate in some locations is down significantly, 30, 40, and 50% in different locations. Because we are doing collaborative courts, and we're doing innovation programs, and we're working with communities, and we're keeping kids in school, and we're working with our homeless community, and we're working with our friends that are struggling with behavioral health or mental health or addiction or substance abuse disease. So we are making, a lot of progress. It's just hard to, because people want it like that. And so we'll get there.
Jared?
In your preferred world, would one of the reforms that you'd like to see happen is that prosecutors are no longer elected? Because if you're worried about a win-at-all-cost mentality, potentially driven by public anxiety, excessive public anxiety, or tough-on-crime sentiment, maybe you shouldn't be elected. Would that be something that you would be interested in thinking about?
Can I just ask you an additional question? If not elected, then are you saying appointed?
Sure, appointed.
Okay.
Even if you are elected.
I think the elected way is the best way because the people get to choose, I mean, you're going to realize that politics is crazy. And a lot of sometimes, and even when someone is perhaps, at least in Texas, when someone's appointed, whether it's for a commission, you're the commissioner of this precinct, or even a county judgeship because someone retired or left, the appointment can be just as skewed as any kind of election. So I feel that elections are the best way to go. If someone gets complacent, you can elect them out. I mean, I just don't think appointments, at least I would be fearful of an appointment versus an election. Just from my own personal opinion is what I've seen through what I've learned, crash shock politics.
So let me jump in because I think it's a great question, and I don't believe that any of these folks would be sitting here if the process, well, maybe with the exception of Dinah, but I would encourage you to listen to this past week's Political Slate podcast with Emily Bazelon and Kim Fox, where that exact issue was discussed, and I think it was a wonderful exchange. I think we need to do better to understand the role of prosecutors and encourage people to vote and educate themselves. But I don't think you would see individuals who are willing to think about this job differently if there weren't a process of election that enables people to put an incumbent's feet to the fire and challenge them and bring new thinking to the job.
Even with the 95% re-election,
I think that stat is going to start to become a relic. And I know that there are individuals who are working in that lane. That's not the work that we're doing. But I think this past November saw something new and different happen among prosecutive elections, and I think it's the beginning of a wave that's coming as opposed to an anomaly. So I think that we're going to start to see that figure dramatically change in the coming years.
And I think there is people don't realize how difficult the job is, I think, because when you're faced with a family that has lost a loved one to a homicide, or their 3-year-old has been brutally raped or sodomized, or their wife has been raped, there has to be that balance as well. You have to answer to the community, you have to answer to the public, and you have justice for all. It's not just one side. And today we haven't had a chance to really talk about it, but every one of these crimes impacts an individual, changes their life forever, and generally changes the lives of those around them. And so there are, and I try to stay away from tough or light on crime and try to stay more focused on principled, ethical, professional, smart on crime type of measures. But there is a place for it. There is a time that it's going to occur. And it's easy to say, no, it shouldn't. But you're not the one that's sitting there after a child's, been raped or sodomized or murdered, and talking with those victims' families and understanding the impact that it's had to them and to that community. And I think by being elected, we are out, and like Diana said, we're out in the community. We're talking to them. We're hearing it. We're seeing it. That's where I first realized the mistakes that I've made in the past, and the way that some of the thinking that I had done. I don't sit up here with a clean slate. I didn't get here without a journey. There's been a long journey, and you have to have that journey, and you have to have other people's journey as well. Because when you go into the office of the district attorney's office, you're going to find hardworking, dedicated, disciplined people who are going to do the right thing. And like any profession that's out there, you're going to have a few that aren't doing what should be doing and doing the right thing. But otherwise you're going to see them there morning, noon, and night, every weekend, working hard and trying to do justice. But you have to balance that all out. And if you go by an appointment system, first of all, I prosecute and elected officials occasionally, time from time. So the people that I might be seeking the appointment from might be under investigation, and that might eliminate me from that appointment. They can eliminate my budget, because if they wanted to really do it, fortunately, I have a great board of supervisors, great elected officials, but they could do those kinds of things as well. So you want to balance it out, and California actually recognizes that. They give me an allocated resource or money that I can do an investigation where I never have to tell the county why I'm spending that money in case I am investigating an elected official. So I think there's pros and cons both ways, but the appointed has to answer to who was ever in that position and whatever their theme or agenda is, and that might not be what the people want, but what they want. And so I think this is important.
I've rarely felt so bad having to close off a conversation.